As always, Anthony, thank you so much for those great stories. You can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more about them. But before we do that, I want to talk more about that horrible case about those 3 assisted living employees. But it's really a disturbing account. So to help me talk a little bit more about it, I have a very special guest for this morning, Editor-in-Chief of our very own Law and Crime, Rachel Stockman.
Well, hello there, Jesse. Unfortunate story to have to talk to you so early in the morning here.
I know, but here, I'm looking at this story and I can't help but think if this wasn't captured on Snapchat, no one would have known.
Yeah, and the scary thing about this, you hear some of these stories coming out, but this happens, unfortunately, with elderly folks way, way too often. And, I mean, I guess in a weird way, thank God for Snapchat, because another employee saw what they were doing and reported them for this. Laughing, smoking, all this stuff while this poor, helpless 76-year-old was just there.
And the funny thing about, for anybody who doesn't know about Snapchat, it erases. So it's how lucky was there, I think it was one of their coworkers that was able to see this in the right amount of time. I think Snapchat only lasts, what, 24 hours or something? Able to see this in time, otherwise they wouldn't have gotten it. But you mentioned a good point. This happens so much for elderly people. Why? Why are they being taken advantage of? There's an article up on lawandcrime.com talking about this story and how there was another case, I believe, about a World War II veteran who was dying in a hospital. And the employees there were laughing. Why take advantage of the elderly like this?
You know, unfortunately, you know, when I used to report daycares and nursing homes, it's people that are helpless. People feel like they can take advantage because they have no way of telling. They're young. When it comes to these daycares, these children are too young to say anything. In nursing homes, a lot of times they're so feeble they can't even say anything. It's just so unfortunate and so incredibly sad.
From a legal aspect, what are they charged with exactly? They're interfering with the
I'm looking up their charges are
I think it's like interfering with the elderly.
And I believe some abuse charges as well.
That is abuse, even though they didn't physically touch him or do anything in that matter. The idea of doing this is just, they have to be charged with something, right? And I wonder, what could they face? Prison time? I know that Ramirez, one of the 3 there, is in ICE detention right now. So, I mean, I wonder.
So she was here on an undocumented immigrant as well.
Right. So I wonder if she might be deported or something like that. But could they face jail time for this?
I think these charges, I believe it's a misdemeanor. So potentially, if they hadn't been in trouble before with the law, they may not have to face any jail time, but we'll certainly see.
It'll go on their record, though. They won't be able to get a job.
They will never likely, especially now that their mugshots have been out like this, ever be able to get a job.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable to see, and I wonder, is there a way to prevent this from happening? Is there a proper vetting process to look at these employees more? I mean, these are people who are taking care of elderly people at the last moments of their life. And then we also were talking about in the break, there's that video of that doctor who was operating on a...
We showed that earlier on Law and Crime.
And dancing around during the operating room. How do you properly vet people in these kinds of situations?
Again, that's the scary thing, because if I don't know, but I don't think these 3 women, they were 21, 21, 2 of them were 21, 1 was 19. My guess is none of them really had any kind of criminal record. So it's really about the interview and whether they seem like upstanding people. And if, you know, they're young and they get something stupid in their mind that they want to do, I don't know if there's much you can do to prevent it other than having constant checks and holding people accountable.
Unbelievable case. Thank you, Rachel. You can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more about that story, as well as the other top crime stories of the day. But I want to switch gears right now. As you know, at the top of the program, I mentioned we are going to recap the Jessica Chambers hearing from yesterday. And again, this young 19-year-old girl that was burned alive, Quentin Tellis, is charged with her murder. His first trial ended in a hung jury. Now we're planning his second trial. And yesterday was a status conference that was going to be routine. It was going to talk about the upcoming trial. But it was anything but routine. As I said, the defense has accused the prosecutor in this case of improper behavior, that namely trying to influence an inmate to testify against Tellis. And what was he trying to get him to say? He said, according to the defense, they threatened this witness in order to say that Chambers had called Tellis Eric as a pet name. And why does that matter? As I said earlier, the last words from Jessica Chambers when first responders came to the scene was that she said an Eric or a Derek did this to her. You can try to see what the prosecution is alleged to have done here. So Jalen Caudle is this inmate, this one who has made this accusation against the prosecutor. We have some of his testimony from yesterday. Let's play that for you right now. Okay, that was pretty big. I hope everybody was listening to that. This man, Jalen Caudle, an inmate in prison, said that John Champion, the prosecutor in the Quentin Tellis case, the man who was charged, Quentin Tellis, charged with the murder of Jessica Chambers, says that John Champion came in and pressured him to testify against Tellis. He said that he wanted him to go on the stand and say that Tellis, when he first met Jessica Chambers, she had a nickname for him, and that nickname was Eric. Now, for anybody who followed this case, you know that the biggest hurdle for the prosecution was the fact that the first responders who first saw Jessica Chambers after she was burned alive, they said that what she said was that an Eric or a Derek did this to her. And that was a big hurdle for the prosecution. Pretty unbelievable stuff. Let's bring back in Rachel Stockman. Wow, that is a big claim that this man is making on the stand.
Huge. Huge.
Huge.
Huge.
Big, huge.
If it's true. And I have some questions as to whether this man's telling the truth.
What are your questions?
Well, he has many conflicting interests here, and one of them being is he is also facing a capital murder charge himself, which obviously he's desperate to get out of. And what better way to get out of a capital murder charge than to potentially engineer that the DA prosecuting you is up to no good and up to all this kind of dirty business. So that could potentially be his incentive for making this up. However, I wouldn't put it past, I don't trust DAs either. I wouldn't put it past a DA to do something like that. So,
well, let's play little devil's advocate here. So he's represented by the same attorney that's representing Quentin Tellis. He knows his legal rights in a way. I'm going to assume that. Isn't it kind of unrealistic for him to think that if he is charged in a capital murder case that he can somehow get off? This isn't stealing from a grocery store. A capital murder case, he really thinks he's going to get some leniency by testifying against Quentin Tellis? That seems unrealistic. What do you think?
yes, it seems somewhat unrealistic, but you also have to remember, I don't know if he's the smartest guy.
But he has an attorney who could tell him this.
True, he does have an attorney. Listen, he went under oath and said that the DA told him to make this stuff up and he would get a better deal. And the truth is, you're absolutely right. The prosecution had a big hurdle in this case, and that is all the paramedics said. Jessica Chambers' dying words were that someone named Derek or Eric, not Quentin Tellis, did this to her. So, yes, does the DA have an incentive to make this up, to pressure this guy, Claudel, into saying something? Absolutely. However, it really comes down to the DA's word versus this inmate's word. That's the unfortunate thing.
I gotta say, this was pretty fascinating stuff. We expected a status conference to be pretty boring, and that was anything but that. We have a lot more to cover on this. We're going to play you some more of this inmate's testimony when we come back from this short break. Stay tuned. Okay, so that was the testimony of Jalen Caudle, the man who claims that John Champion, the prosecutor in the Jessica Chambers case, improperly pressured him to testify against the defendant. Let's bring back in Rachel Stockman. Rachel, we saw a little bit of the cross-examination by the state. They don't want their prosecutor being besmirched in this manner. And then you heard a little bit of the redirect. Do you think they made their point?
Yeah, and of course the whole point of this is the defense is trying to get the DA's office removed from this case and have the state attorney general's office take over. I mean, I think they made their point that clearly this guy had other incentives to potentially make up the story about what the DA said. However, again, it's one of those situations where it is somewhat believable because there is such an incentive for the DA to get this guy to make up the Eric thing that you could see it both ways.
I mean, it really is. That's the last hurdle that the prosecution has to get forward, because how do you reconcile the fact that a man named Quentin Tellis is on trial for the murder of Jessica Chambers, and the last dying words of Jessica Chambers were that an Eric or a Derek did this to her? So, a lot to talk about with this case. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll play you what John Champion has to say.